Guruve Gaura Chanjaya Radhikaya Tadale Krishnaya Krishna Bhaktaya Tadabhaktaya Namo Namaha Vanchakalpa Turubhyascha Kripa Sindhu Vacha Patitanam Bhavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha Jaya Sri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shivasari Shri Gaura Bhaktivinode Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. Dandavat Pranam devotees. So I am trying to maintain a consistency of answering questions that come in. Right now it's a little bit of a backlog because I'm trying to catch up from a certain period of time, so I'm asking devotees to bear with me. And I think I'll also mention here that if you can reach out also, and I think I would be benefited by this as well, that there are many stalwart devotees who are much senior to myself and have depths of realization. They're also many times very, very busy, I understand. But if you also will reach out sometimes to those devotees, if you are pressed to get an answer, if you're trying to find something quickly, sometimes you could reach out to devotees. If you inbox me, I will send you some devotees whom I have very great faith that they could answer any questions that you have. You just have to be very patient for the answer. Of course, you could be saying, well, I have to be patient in one place, why not be patient here? So that's a fact. So, but patience is a virtue in bhakti. Rupa Goswami Prabhupada himself has mentioned that enthusiasm, patience, and confidence are part of the hallmark qualities of practicing bhakti. So I just always feel a little bit like a little bad that I don't get every question every time right away. And definitely has become much improved from doing it in this format rather than trying to answer people either literally by typing and even by the voice facility that's on Messenger. That also becomes, because at only a certain amount of time you can give a message as opposed to expanding on something when you do it via this medium. So anyway, I've also not taken the questions necessarily in sequence because some questions, for one, have really been under discussion in a great way. And I think in some cases, which I did write back to people who addressed me with those questions, you can go back and look at any number of posts or videos on that subject matter, especially when it was the Swarup of the Jiva. Today, there's something about that, but it also deals with Srila Bhaktivinode Thakur, and therefore I've chosen to take that question this morning. Some other questions about practices in bhakti, I've also spoken about that earlier, and because I did title many of the morning question answer sessions, you can also look for that. I wish I had a better system of maybe numerically placing them so I could refer you to a number rather than just the subject matter. Unfortunately, I don't have that set up like that, so you can though look certainly on the thread on my page, and you'll come across that subject matter. And just as a matter of course, if that doesn't happen and you write back, say, well, Mukunda, either it's too old or I didn't find it or whatever the case is, I can either answer you directly or, you know, if I see that it's something that's so much pertinent to so many other people, then I'll answer it on this format again, right? Maybe a short answer, but I'll answer it again here. And again, I always appreciate those Vaishnavas who, by their causeless mercy, they contribute to the discussions and lend their insights, because devotees who have asked the question will gain that much more by seeing the understandings of mature devotees on a particular topic. So without further ado, because I'm always trying to do this in between finishing my morning kind of practice and then preparing an offering for Thakurji for noon, obviously. So, and then conducting other, just natural things in secular life. So, this morning, one question came in about the nature of how we see Srila Bhaktivinode Thakur and Srila Bhaktivinode Thakur's writings. More or less the question was directly, can we look at the writings of Bhaktivinode Thakur and see that all of our Goswamis are present just there, because everyone does not have the facility to go back, and even with English translations, the quality of the translations could be doubted. In other words, he was presenting, I'm paraphrasing, a whole reason why maybe we can just take the writings of Srila Bhaktivinode Thakur, especially like Jaiva Dharma, which seem to contain all the Goswami Granthas. Why can't we just do that? And in combination with hearing from our Guru Padapadma. So I have no objection to that whatsoever. I think if a person is able to understand how Srila Bhaktivinode Thakur is making his presentation, and if you're hearing, if you're not going back and reading yourself, if you're hearing from Vaishnavas, senior Vaishnavas, then certainly you'll still come across the writings of the Puravacharyas through their Harikatha, through their classes, etc., etc. So in terms of translation and vetting translations, etc., you're always going to have that issue, even in the writings of Srila Bhaktivinode Thakur. I've seen maybe 4 or 5 different translations of his commentary on Shishashtakam, right? And you have different ways to analyze different verses that he's written and so forth. Certainly in Jaiva Dharma, there's been translations, obviously, from the Bengali with Sanskrit verses that he's quoted, translations of that into Hindi and into English, right? I have not read it in Hindi. My Hindi is not that great that I'll read a whole book in Hindi. So there's English translations, and I've had different copies of English translations. I obviously have found resonance with the translation that was done under the guidance of my Guru Padapadma. And, but in terms of the idea of just looking at something from the point of view of, well, can I trust the validity of the translation? You're always going to have that problem to some degree, unless you yourself study Bengali or Sanskrit or whatever and look at the originals. And then still, like I remember when I was first attempting, and I'm still always in the unfoldment of attempt to learn Sanskrit language, I would go to the Library of Congress in Washington, D.C., which is where I was living at the time, and they have amazingly a lot of writings of the Goswamis there, right? And so you could look up different writings or things like that of the Goswamis, and which were obviously people who either translated or whatever the case is, but not into English, but they still have the Sanskrit translations there. But the problem is, unless you hear the conception, right? And even if you read the Sanskrit, still you're going to have to look at the commentary, and then you still need the conception. So it's never just a case of knowing the language. Even if you can understand Sanskrit, you need to have context, understand the concept. And a lot of things, especially in the writing of Srila Bhaktivinode Thakur, also deal with historical situations, like he's writing at a certain time, right? And though his writings, just like Srimad Bhagavatam, the word Purana, like Bhagavad Purana, means Pura Api Navam. Something that, even though it is very old, it has relevance eternally. So the writings of Srila Bhaktivinode Thakur are like that. They're not that, though he wrote with consideration of a certain time and certain historical events that were going on, that his writings are limited to that time. His writings are based on the absolute and eternal teachings of Srimad Bhagavatam and our Guru Parampara. So they are eternally manifest as relevant and important teachings in spiritual practice and unfoldment into spiritual perfection. So we should not at all have that idea. But on the other hand, we should also know that Srila Bhaktivinode Thakur wrote with a particular intention and purpose in mind. So the particular intention and purpose, if you wanted to put it in a nutshell way, was that the Bhada Jivas in this world should understand the absolute perfectional nature of spiritual life in the form of Sudha Bhakti. And that the object of that Sudha Bhakti is Bhagavan. Bhagavan always means, along with his name, form, pastimes, dham, parikars, etc. So understanding the totality of Bhagavan and understanding the methodology by which one obtains Bhagavan. This was the sum and substance of the motivation in the heart of Srila Bhaktivinode Thakur in his writing. He was not trying to rewrite what had already been established as Siddhanta by so many previous acharyas, like Jiva Goswami, Shri Baladevi Jabushan, etc. He was writing with the purpose of establishing what is bhakti, what is the jiva, what is the relationship. That was his purpose and motivation. So he wrote in forms that dealt with that trilogy, Bhagavan, the jiva, and the process of obtaining Bhagavan. He did not, though it would automatically happen that so much Siddhanta would be explained and so many other things, but when you look at the nature of the writing, it's writing with that intent in mind. And because that was the intent in mind, he wrote in such a way also to accommodate what he mentions in the 15th chapter of Jaiva Dharma. He wrote in a way to, in many cases, give indication of things, not to directly state those things. So giving indication means, because he acknowledged in the 15th chapter of Jaiva Dharma the fault in Prakat Bhasha, means material language. Because it is trapped, first of all, by past, present, and future, right? When he uses words like created, manifested, so forth, you cannot avoid the implications of the conditioned souls relating to past, present, and future. So it's not possible to avoid that in trying to explain something. So what to speak of trying to explain it in Bengali, then translating that into English and making the concepts work with that same mentality in the Bhada Jivas, make it work in that context, right? So Srila Bhaktivinode Thakur said, therefore, give some leeway to the fact that that's the reality of language. That words will never absolutely capture the reality. So because especially he's trying to encapsulate that entire concept I just mentioned, Bhagavan, the jiva, and the relationship, right, which is what all of our acharyas done, sometimes in specified ways, sometimes in voluminous writing covering many, many books, etc., etc. Though Srila Bhaktivinode Thakur wrote voluminously also, but Jaiva Dharma is like a work which kind of in one sort of synopsis puts it all together. So he's asking for some leeway in the idea that Prakat Bhasha, material language, cannot grasp or fully explain every concept. And in addition to that, the jivas themselves he describes as pramad. Pramad means, they translate it as inattentive, but pramad also means, mother means like intoxicated. So pramad would mean like completely intoxicated by the nature of samsari life, means material life. So we're not any different than the jivas he was addressing at that time, right? And I don't think it was, in fact, time specific, that particular statement, that the jivas, Bhada jivas are pramad, right? So we are also pramad. You know, so many things going on in the material world, and we're trying to, in the midst of that, digest the absolute truth. So Bhaktivinode Thakur was writing in a way to accommodate those factors. One is that the jivas are pramad, and two, inherently in Prakat Bhasha or material language, you cannot fully grab or contain the eternal absolute spiritual concepts. Right? Just like our Srila Prabhupada, he did yeoman's work in translating conceptions in such a way that, you know, from hippies or whatever, people could digest it and actually take up the process of bhakti. Of course, so much had to do with his personal Shakti as well as Bhaktivinode Thakur, any of our pure Vaishnavas. Their Shakti is what allows really ultimately the understanding of what they've written or spoken to become digested. my Guru Pada Padma, he, looking at all the writings of our Srila Prabhupada, extracted and brought out all of the illuminations of the height of all the things Srila Prabhupada wrote. And by his Shakti, he was able to give the power to so many to get a glimpse of that. So Srila Bhaktivinode Thakur, first of all, is to understand his writings are in that vein. And therefore he writes using the system of Vishai, Samshai, Puravapaksha, and Siddhant, but in a unique way, especially in Jaiva Dharma, where that system is in place. You can kind of see it if you understand that system, but he's doing it through almost like his Samadhi novel, so to speak, where in his Samadhi, my Guru Padma has mentioned, he's giving this conversation because all of these personalities are real personalities, right? So in this way, he's presenting the teachings that have come down in the line of Mahaprabhu by especially focusing also the core mood of Srila Bhaktivinode Thakur, also in all of his writings, is the importance of Harinam. Whole Bhajan Rahasya is written on understanding Shashtakam. Similarly, the Das Mool is also more or less an elaboration on Shashtakam, right? Because Srila Bhaktivinode Thakur, again, if you took that trilogy I mentioned of Bhagavan, the Jiva, and the process by which they come together, the central feature in that mix is the process, and the process centers around Harinam. So Srila Bhaktivinode Thakur always wrote with that as the focal point. Harinam is everything. And all Siddhanta, all understandings, everything really come from doing Nam Bhajan. Therefore, in the 15th chapter, he told to Brajanath, listen, I've explained all of these things because Brajanath's question was, what is the Tashta Swabhav? What is the nature of the marginal Swabhav or nature of the Jiva? How he comes under Maya, etc. So he explained all these different things, even quoting from the Brihat Aranyakya Upanishad, so many different things. But then he concluded, listen, I've told you all of these things only as an indication. Because the Jivas are Pramad, they really cannot grasp, right, everything. And even if I told you, you wouldn't understand. He goes as far as to say, even if I tell you, you won't understand. Therefore, try to realize it. Don't even inquire about it from others. Try to realize it in your Chit Samadhi. It means in your Bhajan life. And the core of Bhajan life is Harinam. So Srila Bhaktivinode Thakur, the essential features of his writings was again the establishment of the relationship between Bhagavan and the Jiva, and that the essential means of attaining that is Nam Bhajan spread out through the process of Bhakti, which he goes on to elaborate through all the chapters of Jaiva Dharma. Right? So, also in the course of your questions, you asked about some very specific things like, does he speak about inherency of Bhakti? Does he speak about whether the Ras of the Jiva is fixed? So again, we're kind of going back into subject matter that I said I've already addressed. And actually, you're also asking, in some of the latter part of what you wrote, you were asking about the things that I spoke the other day that you should address to those who are doing research and who are developing a presentation on those particular things. Right? Because you asked me about teleological inheritance. And I mentioned, like, I don't want to mention any devotee's name on these sessions. I've never done that. But that devotee is a very sweet devotee, very nice devotee, learned devotee, and he's doing great research in that field. So again, I told you in the messenger I would reach out to you and give you his information, right? And then, of course, I also told everybody to be patient because they're busy. They're doing between their savor and their research, everything. So you'd have to be patient to get a reply, right? So that's one thing on that point. The other point that you asked me about was whether or not the Ras is fixed, and has Bhaktivinode Thakur said anything about it. So I did pull up from Jaiva Dharma, right, because I remembered, but I didn't want to, in this particular case, just paraphrase what was said, but I'll read directly what was said about that fact. So this appears in the 26th chapter of Jaiva Dharma, and Brajanath asked the question, is the Ross a principle that is predetermined? So first of all, this is a sort of entrance into Srila Bhaktivinode Thakur's discussion on what is Rasa Tattva, right? So because Rasa Tattva begins with a Sthai Bhav, right? The essential part of this question will be, well, is it fixed, meaning, or predetermined? Is that Sthai Bhav predetermined, etc., etc.? And hence the samagri which attaches to it, meaning Vibhav, Anubhav, Sadhika Bhav, Vichari Bhav, right? Is that whole mix, is all of that predetermined already? So then Goswamiji, Gopal Goswamiji answers, I cannot answer that question in a single word, yes or no. I will explain the subject elaborately so that you can understand it clearly. Then he goes on to first describe what is the Sthai Bhav. Okay? So then he says, the Krishna Rati about what you have heard from your Gurudev is called Sthai Bhav. So he first clarifies that already your Gurudev has told you about what is the Rati, what is Krishna Rati, which is called the Sthai Bhav, right? When other components, samagri, of rasa are combined with that Sthai Bhav, the resultant manifestation is called Krishna Bhakti Rasa, right? So now he's going to explain again, because Rajanath is going to want to know clearly what is the Sthai Bhav, because that's the basis of everything else in terms of rasa, and he's going to want to understand if that is predetermined or not. Will you kindly explain in detail what is the Sthai Bhav and what are the constituent parts of samagri or rasa? We have heard from our Gurudev about Bhav, but we have not heard about how Bhavs combine with each other to form Ras, right? So he asked him about, first, make clear what is the Sthai Bhav. So Guru Goswami, ordinarily, he's explaining now what it is. Ordinarily, at the stage of Bhav, so the stage of Bhav we know means Sura Sattva Viseshatma Prem Suryangsa Samyabha Ruchi Vish Chittamasrinya Kuraso Bhavuchate. Having performed sudden bhajan, going incrementally through stages from Shraddha to Sadhu Sangha to Bhajana Kriya to removal of anathas, Nishta, then Ruchi in bhajan, Ruchi in bhajaniya means the object of your bhajan, then the descent of Swarup Shakti. This stage is called Bhav, right? So that was already previously explained. So he's saying, Bhakti is Krishna Rati, that Bhav, that when things, Swarup Shakti descends, that is a Krishna Rati, or a Sthai Bhav. This Rati arises in the heart of the Bhakta. Now he's describing its origin from the sanskars of past and present lives. So, because it's mentioned in Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu, what is it? Praktana Duniki Chashti Yasyat Bhakti Vasana Tam Eva Rasashwadya Tasya Eva Riddhi Jayate. That the particular unfoldment in bhakti up to the stage of bhav, where has it come from? So Srila Rupa Goswami Pad has written that it is coming from the previous impressions that were quiet. Praktanak means previously and Adunik means currently. So the continual impressions coming from bhakti itself, right? And bhakti itself is manifest in sadhus, right? Krishna Bhakti Janma Muluhai Sadhu Sangha, right? I just posted the other day a very wonderful explanation of this from Nitya-lila Pravishtam Vishnupad Paramangsa Astotar Sriman Srila Bhakti Vigan Bharti Goswami Maharaj. He gave such a wonderful explanation. First he starts speaking in Hindi, but then he speaks in English because he's addressing devotees in Badger, right? About the nature of Sadhu Sangha and its relationship kind of to everything. And I had previously spoken about that. So to have found that video just was really, I considered a mercy of Maharaj. Right? So I actually put that on my thread, so you can go back and look at it, and that will give more insight. So he says that this came as a result of past and present sanskars, and it develops further to the stage of rasa, when it becomes the very embodiment of Ananda. And then he goes on to describe the samagri of rasa, like Vibhav, Anubhavs, Satvika Bhavs, etc. And he breaks down what is Vibhava, Lamban, and Udipan, etc., etc. So, this is what he has written about the predetermination of a sthai bhav. Now, I know you have not written in your question, but I know there's implication. What of the statements of our Guru Vargas regarding the already existing presence of a particular mood and everything related to that? So I think I mentioned very clearly on all of the presentations that I made, and I know there's other angles of vision on this, and again, you could hear from others and so forth on this matter, right? But my understanding has been that my Guru Padma has mentioned that everything, including the sthai bhav, everything exists in potentiality. That certainly for a person who is practicing on the path of bhakti, right? And this is very much in line with both Rupa Goswami, Srila Jiva Goswami, all. Because Jiva Goswami comments on the verse, Kriti Sajja Bhavet Sajja Bhavasa Sadanabhida Nitya Sirisha Bhavasha Prakritamriti Sajjata. He comments on this verse that though the Nitya Siddha Bhav is not produced by sadhana, right? Because it is Nitya Siddha, it's eternally existing Bhav, and it resides in the hearts of the eternal associates, right? And it manifests or descends into the hearts of the aspiring devotee when they come into the stage of Bhav. It should be understood that the process is not like material potential, right? So potentiality here doesn't mean like material potential. It could go unfulfilled. He clearly says in the commentary that certainly by the actions of Samvit and Aladini in the future, this Nitya Siddha Bhav will be accomplished. So here we're not speaking about potentiality as something like material potential. Someone may fulfill their potential in some material category or not. He's speaking here that the process of bhakti is absolute. Bhakti is absolute, right? Right? And it's an actual reality. So the person who's practicing bhakti is not at risk that that potential won't become fulfilled. In fact, even in Bhagavad Gita it's mentioned, whatever you have accumulated in bhakti, there's no fear of that being lost. Niha brakamana shoshti prachaveyola vijate swa alpamapisha dharmasha trayate mahatobhya. Whatever you've accumulated in bhakti, that is permanent. That will not go away. Only by aparad it can be checked, but that does not go away. Right? So, the potentiality spoken of by our acharyas here is not like material potential. That's my point. Right? I kind of elongated, but that's the point I wanted to come to. So, because it is an absolute potential, it means certainly it will come to pass by the influence of Bhakti Shakti itself, right? That the jiva will reach their perfection. Right? So, this is how to reconcile the statements of our Guru Vargas, my Guru Padma, and others of our contemporary acharyas when they have mentioned that it is a present, existent potential in the jiva, that they have their ras, their sthai bhav, and everything related to it is already present, but it's in a latent, dormant, unmanifest state. I already mentioned my understanding of those words is always potentiality. And also the seed example, because in the length of your question, you asked me about the examples. Oh, maybe that wasn't you. Maybe that was, I don't want to take time to look in here now, but maybe that was not you. Okay. Anyway, there were a couple of questions, and someone asked about the examples, which I'll conclude with this, about the seed example, the example of iron and magnets, and they asked me about another example. Oh, fire and wood, because I gave that example one time, so they asked about it. And also it's written in Sastra, they mentioned that example of fire and wood. So, all three of those examples, if you examine them closely, they're all manifestations of explanations of potentiality. Like in wood, certainly fire is there in potential. You'd have to put fire to the wood to bring that potential out. Right? It's the same thing with the qualities of iron. Iron has certain qualities that naturally are attracted to a magnet. But without the presence of that magnet, those qualities are not manifest, they're in potentiality. So unless and until a magnet comes, right, they don't have the same quality that they have in the presence of that magnet. Or if you take the example of a seed, every seed has the potentiality to produce a tree of the nature of that seed, but unless the seed goes through the process, right, that it's needed to manifest or bring out that tree, then the seed, if you cut it open, you will not find a tree inside. So practically speaking, all of the examples relate to potentiality. And especially in the seed example, it was not just from our Guru Vargas, but Mahaprabhu gave this himself. Malikana say, Bij aropan shravan kirtane jale kariye shikhan. So Mahaprabhu himself gave this example of a seed and how it grows, turns into a creeper, how it has to be protected, how it grows further, how it breaks through the Brahmandas, how it eventually attains the lotus feet of Sri Bhagavan. Okay. So, yes, if you want to categorize the examples as something else, then you'd have to, first of all, give what category they would fit in, right? So, for instance, another way to look at it, because, for instance, wood and fire, right? Or fire and wood, I should say. If there was actually a fire in the wood would burn. It would burn up, right? Because the substantive presence of the fire, that's what it does. It creates the conditions under which the wood would burn, right? But when it is there in potentiality, it does not burn. So even though fire is there in potentiality, the substance of fire is not there. So what is there? Potentiality. Right? So this is not like some super difficult thing to digest. Same thing in a seed, right? And if you want to call them potencies, you can, right? Because it's still tantamount to the same thing. So if you say there's the potency or potential in a seed to grow a tree, well, that's a fact. So when it comes under the conditions that bring out the growth of the tree, then those things will start to come out. But the tree was never in its fully blossomed, functional, giving fruit form inside that seed. You could never have broken open the seed and gotten the fruits. That's just real. So it existed there as a potentiality. The very good example is that seed is going to produce that tree with those fruits. So this is the way that our contemporary Guru Vargas spoke about these examples, and very wonderfully gave the idea and the concept, right, of how we can understand while we're performing bhajan what's actually happening. That we're in incremental stages through the influence of Swarup Shakti. We're gradually unfolding until we come to the point of the descent of the substance of Swarup Shakti, which then manifests everything which had gone on throughout the incremental development. Okay. All right, I think we will end here. Again, I have to look back, Prabhuji, to see if I missed something in your question, because I think the example questions actually came from someone else. So I will look at it again and then maybe message both of you to see if everything was okay or that your question was answered. My dandavat pranam vancha kalpaturubhyascha kripa shindubevacha patitanam pavanebhyo vaishnavebhyo namo namaha. Jai Radhe Radhe.